Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the very, very kind introduction, and also for the partnership with Leonardo for today. Obviously, the Getty for funding all of these fantastic projects that we've heard about today. And I have to say, I'm very, very excited to learn more about what's going to come up in 24. Just very briefly to the question before, I think art has always been in conversation with nature, no? And if you think of paintings like Turner, it's actually the particles of industrialization that you see in the light that makes his paintings so special, right? So I think, artists have always been somehow in conversation with nature, and obviously through art history, you can then trace the changes in nature, as we can see, and there's many projects that are tracing the migrations of fruit, for example, in Dutch still life paintings and so on. About what I'm doing here and what is TBA 21 Academy. TBA 21 Academy is a research center within TBA 21, which stands for Thyssen-Bornemisza Art Contemporary, which was founded as a collection in 2002 by Francesca Thyssen-Bornemisza. And approaching the 10-year anniversary, she challenged us, the colleagues within the organization, to think about a new project. In this project, with this project, she wanted to change the way that we were working. At the time, we had an exhibition space in Vienna that had 4 annual exhibitions, always based on holding it within the collection and then responding to a new commission. So they were commissioning, producing, exhibiting, publishing, and doing this 4 times a year. And she wanted to start a project that was focused on the environment. And as we heard from Cassandra, the ocean is a fluid system. As we understood that the foundation was very, very interested in change in itself, the causes and effects of change. The proposal was made, can we think from and with change? Can we think from and with a system that is constantly moving, changing, fluid? As it is, the other proposal was, let's not make art for a while. And that was a more difficult conversation. So what we did was we embarked on a journey. We actually went to Greenland. We were able to use a 39-meter Explorer vessel where we invited artists, scientists, environmentalists, legal experts, later on more and more indigenous leadership to come onto this boat and engage with each other, the places, the communities that we would visit, and not produce, just engage with each other and be with, in, and on the ocean. And from there, we then started working. What was always very important was that we would not only exhibit concerns, but we would take the responsibility as an organization to actually respond to the information that we got. And so this meant that it didn't necessarily have to be only art. Right? So it could be art, it could be exhibitions, but it also turned into policy interventions. We are observers at the International Seabed Authority, which is the United Nations tool that is tasked with the administration and distributions of the resources on the deep seabed in the high seas. It could be educational programs as joint PhD programs with the Max Planck Institute. It could be conservation sites. We've initiated 3 conservation sites, are still running 1 through a sister foundation in Jamaica, which we then reconnect to our work through an artist in residence program. We work through long-term research commissions, always led by artists, but always collaborative with scientists, environmentalists, legal experts, and so on. We work through residencies, and we work through fellowships. We have 2 fellowship programs. One is called The Current. The other one are called Ocean Fellows, which is a fellowship in residence in Ocean Space in Venice. You saw a brief image of Taloy Havini's work at Ocean Space. And the next 2 speakers that are going to present their new work, Souvenirs, which is based on communities of organisms that grow on plastic particles that drifted from Japan to the west coast of the Americas after the 2011 tsunami, are Shoghig Halajian and Ohan Breiding. And so please come up and tell us about your work.
Okay, thank you, Robert, Pablo, and everyone at Fulcrum Arts. It was really It's really wonderful to be part of this program. And Markus, thank you for the introduction. Thank you for the continued support. The fellowship was really an important moment for our research and making, and it continues to give a lot to our project. And Cassandra, thank you for the wonderful presentation. It's really a generative and exciting list of artists and themes. In an early scene, a woman looks out onto the gray-blue waters from the deck of a moving ferry. The camera focuses on her hand, which is gently holding onto a boat's railing, and on a thin watch that adorns her wrist. We can't see her face as it's outside the frame, but we do see the face of the watch, a knowing eye that stares back into the camera and at us. This scene is from Chris Marker's well-known 1983 essay film, Sans Soleil, meaning without sun. And it is a direct gesture to his project's reflection on memory, travel, and the temporal drifts and disjunctures that form a portrait of a late 20th century globalized world. In our collaborative project titled Souvenir, we reassemble the scene. A moving ferry, a hand resting on a railing, the steady eye of a watch, but this time we know her name, Mineko Ikehashi. She is our family member, and we are filming her on the Lake of Zurich, a lake whose waters flow down from the glaciers of the Glarus Alps, a body of water that was once used for transport and is now a recreational space, a lake that's walking distance to Mineko's home. As the title Souvenir suggests, we are revisiting and reminding. Our project starts from one scene, which is the moment Mineko shared with us her experience of surviving the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Her biological family lives in Japan and were indirectly affected by the 2011 tsunami and Fukushima nuclear disaster. For some time now, she's been sending us photos and audio recorded memories of her experiences before and after the tsunami. Memory fragments that create an incomplete archive of loss and recovery. From this one place, we start to follow the material and social aftermath of oceanic hazards. We meet a beachcomber, a marine biologist, a custodian of a wave monitoring machine, all distant collaborators who work together across distances, forming a web of relations around distinct oceanic events while performing the daily act of study and stewardship. One could say that our project is in the shadow of Marker's travel route, which spans Japan and Cape Verde and Guinea-Bissau, two former Portuguese colonies. During summers away from our day jobs, we take a similar path. Instead of going there, we receive cell phone footage from Mineko, who is spending time with her family in southern Japan. We go to the Pacific Northwest and look towards Japan across the ocean, and we go to Lisbon and film waterfronts during a residency. While Marker's project underscores how new technologies and imagery move across borders and boundaries, our project looks to how migratory behavior, diasporic existence, and cross-coastal relations are central to the ecosystems we inhabit. So if we can say that our path loosely references Sans Soleil's route, we can also say that it picks up where his imagined future left off. Any ongoing meditation on a global present eventually gets us to the question, how can we imagine space and time beyond our conceptions of proximity and distance, here versus there?
In 2020, we reach out to John Anderson, a beachcomber and retired plumber in Forks, Washington, near the border of Canada. John has been combing nearby Washington beaches for the last 5 decades. With his findings, he eventually established a museum in 2015 next to his house. It's a building that seems to be a large barn overflowing with objects which all came from the ocean. Toys, kitchenware, water bottles, sneakers, fishing nets, surfboards, and a plethora of plastic buoys that range in size. Each object drifted on the surface of water for years, some swallowed up by unsuspecting marine creatures, others snarled in trash piles and released before finally making it to shore. While they drifted, we waited. Their overdue arrivals offer an alternative temporal framework to the persistent rhythm of circulation and consumption that Marker presents to us. We visit his museum and learn about the many objects he has identified, gathering stories of how they might have ended up in the ocean. He does his research. We are specifically interested in the objects in his collection that arrived after the 2011 tsunami, which originated off the Honshu coast of Japan. As utilitarian goods, each item offers a glimmer of the lives they shared with their humans, as well as the traces of their journeys through the Pacific gyres. On the second day of our visit, we wake up at 4 a.m. and head down to the coast, bringing 2 U-hauls loaded with debris from the museum. We are taking these objects back to where they originally were found and creating a large-scale installation. We place the objects according to size and function in order to mirror John's museological approach. We use a drone camera as a scanning device. Instead of going up an aerial, we go as close as possible and then go back towards the ocean to film their migratory arrivals in reverse. The 2011 tsunami led to the massive dispersal of these objects into the Pacific, which drifted on open waters for years until reaching the coasts of Hawaii, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia. The waves also displaced nearly 300 marine species, which rafted on these objects for up to 11 years, reproducing multiple generations en route. Marine biologist Jim Carlton published an article in the journal Science on how these post-tsunami species traveled further than any other coastal marine species, primarily due to the abundance of plastic in our worlds. While natural materials like wood decompose after long exposure to the sun, plastic remains intact, surpassing our lifetimes. Jim's research was a big deal in the ocean studies community, because until then, there had never been a direct observation of coastal marine life crossing long distances, continent to continent, on floating objects. Jim's recent work forced him to unlearn and take back a lot of what he taught his students over the last 30 years. That's science, he says. The concept of rafting, a thing drifting across the ocean with a living being on it, is central to the field of marine biology. Jim explains this to us by way of an elaborate mind twister. He asks, before humans existed, how do you think a land snail was able to get to a hilltop on an island in Hawaii? Birds can fly there, but a land snail drops dead just thinking of salt water. So, he explains, you need a major monsoon that tears a part of a forest, which then floats across the ocean. The snails would have to be way up on the branches to survive exposure. Likely, they land on a coral reef, but no snail would crawl across a coral reef. So at the exact moment when they arrive, you need another major monsoon to pick up that forest and deposit it inland. There are endemic Indo-Pacific land snails in Hawaii, so we assume this happened. Rafting is one of the key assumptions in marine biology. We don't see it happen, we never have, but we believe it did because we have no other explanation. I don't know if this is how Jim sees it, but for us, rafting sheds light on how multi-species movement and migration are foundational to life and world-making. Rafting is also a lens to think about loss and survival amidst catastrophe. Mineko relocated her life to a place far from the ocean and says that it was a specific scene and a specific song that helped her get through her early grief. She held on to the feelings that they gave her. It was a scene of moving clouds while walking up a mountain in St. Moritz, Switzerland, and it was a concert of sad Schubert songs. Because, she says, when you are sad, it's better to listen to really sad music. She records and shares memories with us in fragments. We listen, we transcribe, and follow along. While meeting with Jim in his lab, we eventually learned that he developed his own way of photographing the marine species that are periodically shipped to his lab after being discovered by beachcombers like John. His method, perhaps due to limited resources, is to press his cell phone camera against the lens of a microscope and delicately tilt-shift the angle of the phone until the image appears. We soon abandon the fancy camera we have borrowed and do it this way instead. We have to rehearse it over and over because each time we try, the screen turns black, light specks fill the frame, we are doing it incorrectly, too abruptly, or the marine organism is resisting.
There are some words that do not sit well. Foul, fouling, invasive, so we linger here. As a noun, fouling means the accumulation of unwanted material on solid surfaces. When the post-tsunami marine life arrived on North American shores, they were deemed non-native, invasive, and a threat to local ecosystems. The dualism of native versus non-native is a densely complex one, given the broader context of the global circulation of goods, people, and viruses around the world, and the systematic need to control the migratory behavior of certain species over others. Biologist Banu Subramaniam centers her research on how science deploys xenophobic rhetoric, circulating anti-immigrant narratives of migrants spreading disease, overpopulating due to higher reproduction rates, and costing taxpayers and the government money. She lists newspaper headlines like, "Biological invaders threaten US ecology," and "US can't handle today's tide of immigrants," all of which exclude the fact that these articles are about plants and animals. Although they can be harmful species, invasive as a label is most often determined by commercial interests, conflating economic loss with environmental concerns. Although fouling species do many things like filter particles and improve water clarity, they are deemed unwelcome on human-made infrastructures, invaders that grow on the bottom of boats and docks, leading to material deterioration and increasing maintenance costs for transport. Theorist Ann Singh calls these feral growths, hard-to-control growths that mark the seam between non-human life and the built environment that humans impose upon it. Our filming process involves going to the coast daily. We're recording coastal marine life, specifically barnacles and oysters that grow in the space between land and water. During high tides, they are hidden from view. During low tides, they're exposed. This interstitial space allows us to think of an in-between realm that resists the marked division between land and sea. This space is one of embodiment, in which we follow the patterns and pace of the waves as they're held and released by the position of the moon and the Earth's rotation. Sometimes we can't get the footage when we want to, we show up too late, or we really want to film at that moment, but the conditions make it impossible. The rocks are too slippery, and the water has submerged our silent protagonists to the realm of invisibility. In his discussion of visuality in relation to the ocean, theorist Nicholas Mirzoff highlights how power is contested through visual practices that legislate the sea as a zone of territorial power and free circulation. According to Mirzoff, marine biopower emerged in the 19th century as a resource for settler colonies and for the circulation of capital, offering the right to trade and govern oceanscapes. Mirzoff looks to Joseph Turner's marine paintings and Spike Lee's film When the Levees Broke on Hurricane Katrina to examine how the current crisis of neoliberal circulation has become interactive with the climate crisis. One effect of marine power has been to render the sea as unchanging, as always the same. Mirzoff quotes one writer from a Turner exhibition catalog, quote, "In contrast to landscape, which centuries of human activity changed, the sea remains the same, whatever may happen upon it." So the problems of overfishing, sea levels rising, the acidification of water, and plastic pollution are all rendered invisible under conditions that are always the same. Images like that of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch are in heavy circulation now in an attempt to represent the impact of the Anthropocene. These images metonymically represent realities that are under the threshold of visibility: sea levels rising, toxins, microplastics. Of course, waste colonialism from global north and global south distances a visible here from a there. The head of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change suggested that the 2011 tsunami was more powerful because of the higher sea level in the Pacific. Western media didn't acknowledge this fact. We have more water in our oceans than before. More water means tsunamis are much larger with greater damage. In addition to regular trips to the ocean, we visit the Maregrafo, a tide gauge and sea level recorder that was installed in 1882 in Cascais, Portugal. It is one of the first systems of sea level data collection installed in Europe, and it's still in use today, surprisingly. The equipment, simply put, is the mechanics of a clock attached with wiring to a buoy that is sitting on a water below the building through a deep hole that's cut into the building's floor. As the buoy floats on water, it records the oscillation of ocean waves and sea levels. We meet with Jose Campos, who takes care of the equipment on a daily basis. He tells us that the Margrafo accurately recorded the 2004 tsunami in the Indian Ocean, that an event 12,000 kilometers away was precisely felt here. The Margrafo was likely considered to be a necessary technology since the city of Lisbon nearby was historically shaped by an earthquake and tsunami in 1755. While the Margrafo visualizes wave patterns in an analog way, the European Space Agency is working with newer technologies. They developed the Sentinel-2 mission in 2016, which we heard about earlier today, which includes 2 satellites that continuously scan Earth, collecting data on land and coastal surfaces every 5 days. With satellite sensors, they are documenting sunlight reflected off ocean waves, what we call sun glitter. Imagine standing on a beach, you often see moving lights on the surface of water, inviting contemplation. Highly scattered light on a water's surface means rough seas. So photographing or documenting sun glitter is also meant to be to aid responses to natural disasters such as floods and tsunamis. From one buoy floating in water inside a dome to a continuously active satellite rotating around Earth, these technologies take drastically different approaches to monitoring and visualizing environmental change. Mirzov proposes an alternative option to visuality's aerial distance, disinterestedness, and dominance. Immersion, he claims, is a method of putting seeing into crisis. Instead of immersion as a counter to this view, we look to the surface. The water's surface on which debris and marine life rafted, the object's surface on which marine life grew, the hapticality of this space in its refusal to stay far away. So we subvert and queer the scripted function of each camera technology. We don't use the Sony camera to capture the distant horizon, but play with the abstraction of light moving on water to create poetry. We limit a drone to just above ground and cell phone camera to the microscopic. We're documenting the unnoticed, the daily, and the slow growing. It's our exploratory and improvisational way of building a visual vocabulary that can speak to the affective residues and personal impacts of ecological loss by paying attention to what's right in front of us, even if it's not visible at first. This is where we'll end. Thank you.